For 5 decades, Paul McCartney remained silent, allowing Yoko Ono to shoulder the blame and letting the public believe a version of history that wasn't quite true. But now, at 83, he's finally opening up.
Were you guys competitive, writing with each other? Did you compliment each other?
Me and John? Yeah, we were competitive, yeah. Not openly, but we later admitted, yeah, you know, so Paul's written a good one there, I better get going. And I would similarly, that's a bit good, right.
The truth he's revealing is far more complex, emotional, and painful than anyone expected. This isn't just about Yoko. It's about the deeper issues, personal struggles, and tensions that ultimately shattered the Beatles. It's a revelation that changes everything we thought we knew. Cracks beneath the Beatlemania. In the early 1960s, the Beatles became the biggest band on Earth. Their fame exploded overnight, with screaming fans, endless tours, and constant media attention. But behind the smiling faces and catchy tunes, something was already shifting. The pressure of being global icons wore them down quickly. They were living a dream, but it came with a heavy cost. By 1966, the band had had enough of touring. The noise was too loud, the crowds too wild, and the performances too chaotic. They decided to stop touring and focus only on studio work. But instead of bringing them closer, it pushed them into long hours, creative disagreements, and personal distance. Being stuck in studios with no audience and too much control changed the energy between them. The Beatles were no longer just musicians. They were a brand, a symbol, and a business. That success came with new rules, new managers, and more outside opinions. They had to make decisions not just for their music, but for their image and company. Slowly, each member began to drift into his own world. The unity that made them strong started to fade without anyone noticing. John Lennon began pulling away from the group identity. He got more involved in politics and personal exploration, no longer fully committed to the band. George Harrison turned toward spiritual growth and started writing more of his own songs. Ringo Starr tried to keep up, but often felt lost in the background. And Paul McCartney became the one trying hardest to hold everything together. Paul took charge of the sessions and tried to steer the band forward. He pushed for discipline and structure, hoping to keep the magic alive. But his control began to feel overwhelming to the others. George, especially, felt unheard and unappreciated. That tension grew as Paul focused more on direction than collaboration. The balance they once had was gone. Paul was stepping up, but the others were stepping back. George's songwriting was evolving, but he wasn't given the same space as Lennon or McCartney. The team effort that once defined them had become a struggle for control. Everyone had a different idea of what the Beatles should be. A new insight rarely explored is how the group's shift from stage to studio created emotional distance. Without the adrenaline of live shows or the bond of touring life, their connection grew cold. They weren't sharing experiences anymore. They were just clocking into work. That routine made them feel more like co-workers than brothers. The music stayed good, but the feeling behind it changed. Paul would later describe it best when he said, "We were no longer a band. We were just 4 guys in different orbits." And that's exactly what was happening. They had reached the top, but there was nowhere else to go together. Fame hadn't just lifted them, it isolated them. And those cracks were only getting wider with time. For decades, Yoko was blamed for the breakup. But what if she only revealed the truth that the Beatles tried to hide? Yoko wasn't the only storm. For decades, Yoko Ono was blamed for breaking up the Beatles. Her constant presence in the studio and close bond with John Lennon made her an easy target. Fans and media painted her as the outsider who disrupted the group's chemistry. But that version of the story ignores everything that was already happening inside the band. The truth is, Yoko didn't create the tension. She arrived during it. By the late 1960s, Lennon was emotionally distant from the band and searching for something new. Yoko gave him that escape through art, ideas, and a deep personal connection. When she entered the studio, she wasn't just a guest. She became part of John's creative process. To the others, this felt strange and uncomfortable. But her presence was a symptom, not the cause. The Beatles were already pulling apart. Yoko just made that more visible. She was in the room while the cracks widened, but they were already there. Lennon no longer wanted the same things as Paul or George. Their paths were splitting long before Yoko stepped in. A key detail often missed is that John invited Yoko in fully. This wasn't something she forced. He wanted her at his side at all times, even during recording sessions. This decision disrupted the group's rhythm and broke an unspoken rule. Still, it wasn't Yoko's doing. It was John choosing to change the dynamic. And Paul now admits they didn't know how to handle that. In later years, Paul said he saw how strong their bond was and understood why John needed her close. It still hurt the group dynamic, but the idea that Yoko ruined the band oversimplifies everything. She didn't tear anything down. She walked into something already falling apart. The band was fading, and she became the easiest person to blame. Yoko herself once said that being blamed for the Beatles' breakup felt like being accused of murder when the victim was already dying. Paul now agrees with that statement. He knows the group was already drifting, and blaming one person was never fair. What fans saw on the surface had much deeper roots. It was a slow breakdown that had nothing to do with her. Outside of Yoko, each member was already heading in different directions. John was into experimental music and emotional healing. Paul leaned toward clean production and catchy melodies. George wanted more space to grow as a songwriter, but felt constantly pushed aside. Ringo was drained and unsure of his place. They weren't one team anymore. They were four different people chasing four different ideas. A new insight here is how John's shift into avant-garde art with Yoko pushed Paul into survival mode. He tried to keep the band's identity intact, while John moved toward a new kind of expression. That added pressure only made things worse. Paul wasn't fighting Yoko, he was trying to hold on to what the band had been. And that gap in vision left no room for healing. John's exit and Paul's silence. In 1969, John Lennon told the band that he was done. When he said he was leaving, everyone was shocked. Paul was shocked, but he didn't say anything. The group chose to keep quiet for business reasons. To protect the brand, they had to look like a team while working out contracts. Things got dull for a while, but the band still played in public for months. No one said anything because they knew the end was near. Paul worked on new music and tried to keep things together because he was still hopeful. But when his first album came out, everything changed. It became a story in the news that Paul had quit the Beatles. It got a lot of attention. Paul overnight became the bad guy. Fans said he ruined the most popular band. He hadn't left, though. John had. Paul had kept quiet to keep his promise and protect the history of the group. He paid for his silence. His goal was to clear things up, but it was too risky. If the band spoke out, it would hurt their reputation even more, lose deals, and make fans mad. He didn't say anything. Some people thought he was the one who left. It made him feel bad inside. He and his wife, Lind, shut out the world when they went back to Scotland. He felt very sad when he was by himself with his thoughts. He drank too much, stopped believing in himself, and believed that the end of his career was near. It was the worst time of his life. Cindy was there for him when things were tough. He was very good at writing music, so she told him to do it again. Little by little, Paul began to record new songs. Wings got its start in these rooms. It was how he fought back from the edge. Now that Paul has shared a new idea, his silence is even more important. He said it didn't bother him that people would blame him. To protect what the band used to stand for, he chose peace over telling the truth. He chose to take the hit rather than see the Beatles break up in public. No one saw how much Paul gave up to keep the band's name clean. He let go of the story, but there was a bigger reason. He wasn't weak. He chose to be quiet. He took responsibility so that there would be no fight when the Beatles broke up. He believed the pain was worth it. The Beatles didn't explode. They slowly unraveled. And now, Paul reveals the 4 hidden forces that truly pulled them apart. The real reasons. The Beatles broke up. The breakup of the Beatles wasn't caused by one moment or one person. It was a slow unraveling, shaped by creative pressure, personal changes, and power struggles. Their bond, once tight and effortless, began to wear down under the weight of success. Each member had grown into a different version of themselves. By the end, they weren't breaking up. They were falling apart. The creative tension hit hard. Lennon and McCartney's songwriting partnership, once seamless, started to drift. John was drawn to raw emotional expression. Paul preferred structure and polish. At the same time, George Harrison began writing songs just as powerful, but struggled to get them heard. George wrote Something and Here Comes the Sun, 2 of the band's best songs, but he still felt overlooked. Lennon and McCartney took up most of the space, leaving George frustrated. Paul later admitted that they didn't give George enough credit or control. This caused resentment to build quietly in the background. It chipped away at the group's unity from inside. Then came the loss of Brian Epstein. He was the band's manager and their calming guide. Without him, there was no clear leader, and chaos followed. Decisions became harder, arguments more frequent. The group struggled to agree on anything important. This leadership gap turned into a full-blown power struggle. Paul wanted Linda's father, Lee Eastman, to manage the group. John, George, and Ringo backed Alan Klein instead. It became a legal mess that split them further. In the end, Paul sued the others, not to win, but to save the band's work from being mismanaged. That lawsuit shocked fans, but it was the only way Paul saw to protect the music. He wasn't trying to hurt the others. He just wanted control of their future. The move made him look cold, but it was a necessary step. It was about rights, money, and protecting years of work. Outside of business, their personal lives were also drifting. John was exploring new ideas with Yoko and diving into political causes. George turned inward, finding peace in Eastern religion and playing solo music. Paul stayed focused on producing and arranging, still trying to keep things moving. Ringo felt stuck in the middle, often unsure where he fit. They were all changing and moving in separate directions. The Beatles weren't boys in a band anymore. They were adults with different goals, beliefs, and priorities. Their friendship had evolved into a tense working relationship. There was no one big fight, just a series of small splits that added up. The bond that once held them together quietly faded. A new insight worth noting is how their silence and image control only made things worse. By hiding the internal issues, they let myths grow. Fans thought the band was fine until it wasn't. That gap between public image and private truth made the collapse more shocking than it needed to be. At 83, Paul isn't rewriting history. He's healing from it. And the truths he shares now change everything we thought we knew. Making peace with the past. At 83, Paul McCartney is no longer carrying the weight of old rumors. He's not changing the story. He's setting the record straight. For years, he let people believe he broke up with the Beatles. He allowed the media to spin the tale because protecting the band's name seemed more important. But now, with time behind him, he's ready to speak with clarity and peace. Paul has looked back at those final years more than anyone realizes. He's studied the details, replayed the choices, and accepted the mistakes. His memories of each bandmate are full of warmth and regret. He sees things differently now, not through anger or sadness, but through maturity. What once felt like betrayal now feels like growth. He reflects on Yoko and says he admires how deep her connection with John was. Back then, it felt disruptive, but now he sees it as real love and loyalty. He understands why John brought her everywhere. They were a unit, and Paul respects that now. He also speaks about John with deep affection. They argued, but it came from being close, not from hate. Paul remembers George as a quiet genius who deserved more space. He now admits he didn't say it enough, that George was brilliant, thoughtful, and full of talent. It's one of his biggest regrets. Looking back, he sees George not as a junior member, but as an equal. The respect was always there, it just wasn't always spoken. A new insight Paul shares is that he never wanted to be seen as the one who ended things, but he was also afraid of seeing the group fall apart in public. So he stayed quiet, hoping the storm would pass. It didn't, but today he's able to speak with balance and honesty. He now believes the breakup wasn't about blame. It was about timing, change, and personal growth. The Beatles didn't collapse. They evolved, then went their separate ways. Each member had to find his own voice, and that couldn't happen inside the same band. The split was painful, but it was also part of life. Paul says if he could go back, he wouldn't change how it ended, just how it was handled. He'd speak up earlier, tell the truth sooner, and remind everyone that they were still a family. Not perfect, not always kind, but still connected. That's the lesson he carries today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click on the next video popping up on your screen for more amazing content.